Hi again. Judges. We're going to be looking at chapter 1 today. This is our second session in studying the book of Judges. The first session was all introduction. Judges, probably written by Samuel. Not quite sure, but probably yes. And probably takes place between around 1350 and 1050 before Christ. So it's 1,000 to 1,300 years before Christ. And I have something in on my glasses. Sorry. Okay. It's found in the Old Testament, if you need to know that. And my first question is, did you do the homework? Did you read the first couple chapters of Judges? Did you look and watch the video that I mentioned? If you need to know the website again, look at the description of the intro video, and it has the name of the website, BibleProject.com. And we are going to continue, or really begin, the book of Judges. I want to talk a little bit about it before we actually get into reading it. The more I look at it, the more I study it, I realize that when Moses was alive, he was kind of like the caretaker, the leader, the father of the nation of Israel. And when he died, God named Joshua to be the next leader. And we're going to hear in chapter 1, and then when we do chapter 2, in chapter 2, that Joshua dies, because at the end of Joshua he dies, and in both first and second chapters of Judges they mention it. In fact, second chapter, it's almost the exact same thing as what's said at the end of Joshua, but that's okay. Joshua dies. He's 110 years old, and God does not name another leader. There's a transition from the book of Joshua and the book of Judges. In the book of Joshua, the entire nation has come in and taken basic control, staked out their area. A lot of people there have either died or left, and left it for them, as God had promised. And then you get to the end of Joshua and the beginning of Judges. Joshua, before he dies, he says, okay, now it's up to you to finish the job. And at the beginning of Judges, they all 12 tribes go off to their allotted area, supposed to continue the cleansing of that land of the false gods and those who worship false gods. And each one, basically it's like you grow up, you had your childhood, you had your parents there taking care of you, and now you're an adult, and the framework has been created during your childhood, and now as an adult, go out and take care of your life yourself. And I will tell you, the Israelites do a lousy job of being grown up. We will see this in the book of Judges. And they're not very good at growing up as a nation or as a tribe even. Some worse than others. They have this fixation with their own. It almost goes back to Exodus, when they sent in the 12 spies, and 10 of them came back out saying, we're like grasshoppers to these giants. And Caleb and Joshua said, yeah, but with God we can. And we'll get all the way through Joshua and all of that, and we get into Judges, and it's like, we're grasshoppers and we can't take them over. It's like, we can try, but don't blame us if we can't do it. I also want to mention that this is just this is all happening just at the beginning of the Iron Age. We're going from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age. And so iron is mentioned here as this, wow, we can't fight against iron. So keep this in mind, that this is the time period historically on the earth where we're transitioning from the Bronze Age into the Iron Age. And let's begin with chapter 1 of the book of Joshua. And I'm going to show you a map, and I'll be showing it to you as we read along chapter 1. These are the assigned areas for each of the tribes. They're each supposed to go into their own area and get it, up to God's standards. Okay? And we'll be looking at that. This is a simple one which just shows you where they are supposed to settle. Okay. Joshua chapter 1, verse 1. And we're just going to read verse 1 before we continue. After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, remember that, asked the Lord, who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites? So which of these tribes needs to go first into their area and rout out the Canaanites? Verse 2, the Lord answered, Judah is to go. I have given the land into their hands. So it's like we're following God's directions. Isn't this good? We're following God's direction. We're asking him first. So I'm going to actually read 3 through 10, which is kind of this first section of Judah following God's directions. Okay? Beginning with verse 3. Then the men of Judah said to the Simeonites, their brothers, come up with us into the territory allotted to us to fight against the Canaanites. We in turn will go with you into yours. So the Simeonites went with them. When Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands, and they struck down 10,000 men at Bezek. It was there that they found Adoni-Bezek and fought against him, putting to rout the Canaanites and Perizzites. Adoni-Bezek fled, but they chased him and caught him and cut off his thumbs and big toes. Then Adoni-Bezek said, how dare you? It's like, no, he didn't. He didn't actually get mad at them even. He says, verse 7, 70 kings with their thumbs and big toes cut off have picked up scraps under my table. Now God has paid me back for what I did to them. They brought him to Jerusalem, and he died there. The men of Judah attacked Jerusalem also and took it. They put the city to the sword and set it on fire. After that, the men of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites living in the hill country, the Negev and the western foothills. They advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron, formerly called Kiriath Arba, and defeated Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. Let's stop there for a minute. Bring up the map. Judah. Judah's land is all of this. And when you look at the map, it makes sense why they ask the Simeonites if they'll join them. Because Simeon's section is actually completely landlocked inside Judah's. So it makes perfect sense that the Judahites would ask the Simeonites to help them take over their land, so then they will help them take over the land promised to Simeon's descendants. And I will warn you, Joshua has sections in it that would make a movie R-rated for the violence, if it were shown. And I don't even want to imagine what some of this is, including the thumbs and big toe thing. But obviously, that was a sign that was usually done to a king that had been vanquished. They had won against them, and that was a sign that you are no longer in power. So we have all of this going on, and it's like, okay. Now I will say, I'll use a map that has cities on it. It mentions how they went into Jerusalem and took it, but Jerusalem's not in their part of their property. And so later on, when the Benjamites go to get Jerusalem, it appears that the Canaanites have returned, and because Judah, it wasn't theirs, they might have gone there to fight because Adonai-Bezek went there. But it's, yeah, you'll see it in other chapter place or whatever, where, or later on in this one, where Jerusalem does not stay free and clear to the Israelites. It reverts to Canaanites, or actually Jebusites to be precise. So they've done this. They've advanced against the Canaanites living in Hebron. And actually, I went and I pulled up one of these maps and circled cities that were mentioned. So see, Hebron is right here. Okay, I put a little circle around the ones that they vanquished, that they won over. And we're going to, the next section kind of, there's chapters 1 and, well, actually, chapters 1 to 17 through 21 are not necessarily in chronological order, because in chapter 2, like I mentioned, all of a sudden we're back to Joshua at his deathbed, which really sends us back to Joshua chapter 24, when Joshua is on his deathbed. But this next section is almost word for word from Joshua chapter 15. So later, if you want to go and compare them, be my guest. In Joshua chapter 15, verses 13 through 19, it says almost the exact same thing. We believe that it is repeated here because of a key name in it, and you'll see it when we get to it. So let's read verses 11 through 15. From there they advanced against the people living in Debir, formerly called Kiriath Sefer. Debir. Oh, I didn't circle it. Right there, Debir. Let me just circle that. And, let's see. And Caleb, remember that name? That's a popular name. That Caleb said, I will give my daughter Aksa in marriage to the man who attacks and captures Kiriath Sefer. Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it. So Caleb gave his daughter Aksa to him in marriage. One day, when she came to Othniel, she urged him to ask her father for a field. When she got off her donkey, Caleb asked her, What can I do for you? She replied, Do me a special favor. Since you have given me the land in the Negev, give me also springs of water. Then Caleb gave her the upper and lower springs. Stop there for a minute. So, obviously, we're talking about this area here, and Othniel is that key word, that key name in that section, because Othniel will end up being the first judge. Okay, so if you sneak a peek to chapter 3, you'll see that his is the first name of the 12 named judges. So this is a little aside. We think that because it's a repeat of basically of what's in Joshua chapter 15, it's put into Judges just because it has something to do with that first judge. kind of like, a biography, a biographical note for somebody, if we're in the Salvation Army, you're talking about William Booth. Well, let's go back and give you a little anecdotal story from his past that will, just kind of like support and uplift what's coming up later. Okay, so this is all wonderful. They are, if you notice, there's a lot of circles down here. A lot of circles. We're still going to be talking about some of these places that have circles around them. Okay, so we continue with verse 15. And we're going to read from 15 and 16. Just two verses because, again, another name is mentioned that is very well known. This last one had Caleb, and then now his new son-in-law, Othniel, which actually is his nephew as well. Yeah. Actually, verse 16. Just 16. The descendants of Moses, father of Moses's father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms, which is another name for Jericho, with the men of Judah to live among the people of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad. So apparently the descendants of Moses's father-in-law, his wife's extended family, moved from Jericho, which is up in this area, if I'm looking correctly, right on this side of the Jordan, someplace over here, and has moved down to be in the area, in the Judah area near the Negev, which is kind of further down, I believe, from the Dead Sea. And Jericho would be up around this area, and he's come down here to live amongst them. If you notice, the rest of this chapter, we're going to be naming a lot of the different tribes and their work on taking over their areas. And when I first did it, I'm here going, there's some names missing. And sure enough, Reuben and Gad are not mentioned because they have already been given land on the other side of the Jordan. God approved it. They asked for it. They had been attacked. The Israelites had been attacked there. They won the battles. And so technically it was their land now because they had been attacked. And so Gad and Reuben and some of Manasseh's tribe asked for land on the other side of the Jordan, opposed to the promised land area here. And God approved it. And so they are not mentioned with those who are working to clean up their area, their personalized areas, because they are already, technically their area is supposedly pretty clean. I'm not sure about that later, but for now, yeah. Okay, so now, here starts the beginning of the downfall for Judah. Verses 17 through 19. Then the men of Judah went with the Simeonites, their brothers, and attacked the Canaanites living in Sephath. Let me see if I have that one. Do I have Sephath? No, I don't see it. Okay. And they totally destroyed the city. Therefore, it was called Hormah. That sounds familiar. Oh yeah, there it is. Hormah, way down south. Okay. The men of Judah also took, these are here, Gaza and Ashkelon and Ekron. Ekron, right there. Okay. So they're just kind of like doing a circle here and just taking over and clean their area. Each city with its territory. They took the city and the territory that belonged to it. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country here's a negative. But they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had iron chariots. Remember, way back to the 12 spies going in and saying, 10 of them saying, we're like grasshoppers to them. They're like giants. There's no way we could beat them. I can see the descendants of Judah saying, but they have iron chariots. There's no way we could beat them. Yet just before that, it said the Lord was with the men of Judah. God was there helping them take over and over and over. And yet when it gets to that valley area, the plains over there where the Canaanites have iron chariots, oh, we're no match for that. Well, no, you might not be, but God is. And this is the beginning of the downfall. Verse 20 and 21. Well, verse 20. As Moses had promised, as Moses had promised, and this is going back into even Deuteronomy and the early Joshua. As Moses had promised, Hebron was, as Moses had, oh boy, I'm having trouble with that. There is a comma there. As Moses had promised, Hebron was given to Caleb, who drove from it the 3 sons of Anak. Okay, so he got his promised land. And if you don't know that story, it's a really interesting story. It's basically, it's like the toughest part of the entire country to take over. And Caleb, now around 80 years old, 70, 80 years old, says, give it to me. With God, we can take it. And he does. They did, and he does. And so here you just have the quick little sentence about it. But it's basically showing, right after saying, oh, but the Judahites couldn't take over the people of the plains because they had iron chariots. Whereas Caleb, who's 80 plus years old, saying, "Oh, give me the tough area. We got it," and they did. Back to back, it's showing if you put your trust in God, opposed to, I'm not quite sure about this. So we continue. Verse 21. The Benjamites, however, failed to dislodge the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. I told you we were coming back to Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites live there with the Benjamites. Again, that's part of the reason why we think Samuel is the one who wrote this, because there are several references of places or events that are to this day. And we know that the Jebusites were kicked out of Jerusalem totally by King David, which, is, you have the judges, King Saul, King David, and Saul anointed David. So Samuel anointed David. So this has to be before. It can't be somebody writing after David. It has to be before David takes Jerusalem and really does kick out all the Jebusites or kills them. So this is another clue that's hidden in there. Verses 22 through 26. Now the house of Joseph attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, formerly called Luz, the spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Show us how to get into the city, and we will see that you are treated well." So he showed them, and they put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family. He then went to the land of the Hittites, where he built a city and called it Luz, which is its name to this day. Again, another little snippet there. And that's his name. That city, Luz, was still around when this book was written. Okay? But again, I look at that and what story does it remind you of? I hope you're thinking Jericho, because remember, you send in the spies into Jericho, and Rahab, she hides them and she helps them escape when they're being sought after. And she and her family are spared when Jericho is, walls come tumbling down, Jericho is defeated. She ends up marrying, and her son, she marries an Israelite. Her son ends up being the husband, the second husband, after her first husband dies, of Ruth, who happens to end up being the grandmother of King David. So here we're seeing an example of that, if you side with God's people, he'll take care of you. You'll be okay. Now, in this man's case, he didn't stay with the Israelites. He didn't stay with God. So I don't know what his life was like after that. But we do know in the example of Rahab, when she chose to join the Israelites and worship their God, she was included in not just the lineage of King David, but in the lineage of Jesus. So, and I'm getting sidetracked. We need to finish this to make sure we don't go over our time, because we're almost done. And I must have put down the sound so much that I'm not hearing it here. Oh, okay. Anyway, 27 to 36 is the sad part, the truly sad part of this chapter. But Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan or Tanakh or Dor or Ibleam or Megiddo and their surrounding settlements, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. Really? With God? When Israel, verse 28, when Israel became strong, though, they pressed the Canaanites into forced labor, which is not what they're supposed to do. Remember, God told them, actually, if you go way back, you'll see that the instructions are for people outside of the country, if they attack you or if they're, in that area, you are to siege the city, and if they give in, then you let them live, but you make them into forced labor. But inside the promised land, you're not supposed to let anyone live. And here we have the Canaanites. The Manasseh tribe can't overtake them, but later when the Israel gets stronger, they force them into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. That's the rest of that sentence. 29. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, but the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron or Nahalol, who remained among them, but they did subject them to forced labor. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Akko or Sidon or Ahlab or Aksib or Helba or Aphek or Rehob. And because of this, the people of Asher lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. Neither did Naphtali drive out those living in Beth Shemesh or Beth Anath, but the Naphtalites too lived among the Canaanite inhabitants of the land. And those living in Beth Shemesh and Beth Anath became forced laborers for them. The Amorites confined the Danites, the Amorites, the enemy, confined the Danites, a tribe, to the hill country, not allowing them to come down into the plain. And the Amorites were determined also to hold on out in Mount Heres, Aihalon, and Shaalbin. But when the power of the house of Joseph increased, they too were pressed into forced labor. The boundary of the Amorites was from Scorpion Pass to Selah and beyond. That's the end of chapter 1. And we see that part, there's no mention of God. It's just the tribes. Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, Asher, Naphtali, Dan, and Joseph. Joseph's got a couple sons. And Benjamites. Benjamin, descendants of Benjamin. All of them, none of them really take over their land. And when they do become powerful enough that they could do it, they don't. They just make the enemy forced laborers. They break the covenant with God right from the beginning. God said, you have to get rid of them. And if you don't, and this is why I want to go back into that covenant, that warning that God gave in Joshua chapter 23, which says, and I'm over time now, Joshua 23:12. But if you turn away and ally yourself with the survivors of these nations that remain among you, and if you intermarry with them and associate with them, then you may be sure that the Lord your God will no longer drive out these nations before you. Instead, they will become snares and traps for you, whips on your back and thorns in your eyes, until you perish from this good land which the Lord God has given you. And yeah. Okay. Homework. I'm going to ask you to read chapters 1 and 2 again. 1 and 2. The one we just read and the one that's coming up. Chapters 1 and 2. If you want to delve again a little bit more, maybe you started reading one chapter a day from the intro, continue that. Go 8 to 14 now. If you've read all the way through, because you'd read 3 chapters a day, and you want to really understand this a little bit better, do it again. Read 3 chapters a day and really get into it. If you have not watched that cute video, I'm telling you, it is really cute. It's short, it's 7 minutes, and it gives you a complete overview of the book of Judges. So, that's your homework, and I'll see you in a few days. Bye.